The following is a quote by Pablo Picasso, the artist. We all know that art is not truth. Art is a lie that makes us realize truth, at least the truth that is given us to understand. The artist must know the manner whereby to convince others of the truthfulness of his lies. Now, where this ties into esports is, you'll notice a heavy emphasis of the last few years of esports journalism and in general production of esports is tying into a similar trend that emerged in sports itself over, I'd say, the last decade and a half, which is trying to paint a narrative, trying to put together a story which makes it more than just a sporting event taking place and a great player winning a game and the latest guy who's on the best team going to the championship for the first time. Rather than the very, very simplistic day-to-day storyline of what's actually happening just in the nuts and bolts world of reality, we paint these larger narratives and tie in what's happening to archetypes of human history and myth. In doing so, there's incredible potency to be found. These are really powerful ways of making these stories have meaning by making them representations of or manifestations of something bigger, an overarching story that's a part of life and struggle and success and ambition and all the things that make up human. I guess you'd best describe it as the way humans conceive of or perceive the world and our own lives within it, and then the meaning we attach to it. Now, in esports, the potency of these narratives can be incredible. I mean, they can elevate what are a bunch of people playing video games, admittedly at a very high level, in tournaments where you might play some of the tournament in the quarterfinals on the same stage that the grand final is going to be played at. So technically there's no real manifestation that's different from that, but it feels different and the meaning of it is more different. And that's why when Astralis wins the major in CSGO, it has a massive effect and it means a lot to them, even though they were playing on the same stage that they would have played on if they'd gone out in the quarterfinals. And they're still playing the same video game and they're still playing a very good opponent, but there's something more there. And so the potency of the narrative of Astralis' struggle and what it meant to him in the past and when Device had let himself down in big matches, and the fact they'd never been to a final before. So you've noticed if you look at my own career, the esports narratives that I paint, they have an element of this to it, where there's an element of art to it, and there's an element of creativity, where what I'm looking for is I'm not just looking at the player and saying, right, this guy has to be some incredible human being. He has to be one of the men for all seasons. He has to be someone where his own life and everything about his story connects into some grand overarching. No, what you're going to do is I'm looking to find what is it about this player and his toils and his successes and his failures that relates to me to some archetype, to some bigger meaning, some significance that has greater significance, more meaning than just simply him playing a game and being very good at it and being one of the best players. And so throughout my own career, I'll give you a few examples. Players like in Counter-Strike Global Offensive, we can say Get Right. So Get Right is someone where, to me, he represents the guy who's the fighter. The guy who isn't just bred to be the best player and doesn't just have all the natural talent in the world, where it's merely a case of just unlocking that and then becoming the best. This is the guy where he's pretty good, but he's never supposed to be the best. And through hard work, through work ethic, through discipline, through applying himself, through crafting that mental edge that he wants to constantly get towards the top, get back to the top, it's possible to do so. He almost can't be held back. And so eventually when he breaks through and becomes the best or one of the best, there's something incredibly satisfying about that, and there's something that connects his toil to the latest success more than just seeing how in the game he became better later on. But at the same time, he's not like that every day. He's not like that at every single moment. Yes, he is one of the hardest workers. Yes, there have been times when he really embodied this, but there's an element of art to it. It's not the pure truth. It's not false either. It's true in a sense that it holds some great meaning. Not necessarily true in the sense that it's all the exact reality. And we're not talking just semantically here. We're talking about significance for us as humans and how we perceive these stories and what's happening. So in League of Legends, there's a player called Alex Ich. And if you've ever read, I did an article, I'll put it in the link description box below, about Alex Ich when I was at On Gamers. And to me, Alex Ich represents the guy where he's the big brother figure. He's the guy where he doesn't have to bark his orders to tell you what to do. He doesn't have to say, hey, come and follow me in this way. The way he plays and his entire kind of demeanor makes you see someone who's an ideal of a man, who you would follow, who inspires this confidence in you to play. And that's why I always saw him as a great captain when he was in Moscow 5 and Gambit, even though that was a team that's very fractured, very difficult to keep together, had all these different personalities and kind of politics within of who liked who, and people whose playing styles sometimes clashed in terms of like Genja and Edward, for example. But he was the person holding it all together, and through his force of will almost. I mean, in Dota 2, the player How, famously of Newbie, and later on, obviously, who else was he in? Oh, Vici Gaming, obviously, is a classic one, 2015. This is a guy where, for me, he's the guy where he leads by example, but just in terms of performance. Like when he's playing, the reason if you have How on your team, you think you can win the game, is if the game gives him an opportunity, he's going to seize it and he's going to go complete for broke with it. And if there's an opening and it still be very difficult and very risky, he's going to take it and he's going to do anything he can, no matter how difficult it is, to win this game. That's why he's one of the great winners, one of the best carries, one of the players where even in the era when they say like the carry doesn't exist in the same way anymore, you can't play the game that way, he still finds ways to win. And you can put him on any team with any teammates, he'll find some way for success because he's got that kind of like mindset in that particular way. And I feel like it keys his teammates into the same thing. But are all these things present at all times? No, Alexic has at times been, I mean, he was terrible in Renegades. He didn't have a lot of success there at all. How? Okay. You put him on, I mean, at times, he just hasn't been the best player, right? He couldn't always do all that stuff. The point is not that they are exactly that, it's that they embody something, that they represent something bigger, however temporarily, and that the way we tell the story keys into that, and that's what we're trying to connect for the person. Now, there's a dark side to this as well, of this narrative-driven focus, which is one of the reasons why, unfortunately, as much as I love it when it's done well, it actually, at times, I can find it almost disgusting, because there's people who come in, and they're not looking to see what they can relate there. They're not trying to connect and find something that they are then going to express part of something bigger or something more meaningful. What they do is they come in and they think, well, there's no story here. This is what mainstream people especially do. They go, there's not really much of a story here. Or, you know what, I'd like it if this was the story. And they just impose a story, a narrative over the top of what's happening. And they'll cut off any little bits that are loose. And it's almost like having the square and the round hole. And they just cut around the edge of the square so it becomes a round. And go, oh, there we go, it fits through. And they, as a result, hack away at all these things that are important and meaningful. And they don't get to anything of significance. They force a very simplistic, artificial storyline that doesn't distill the essence of the person. It doesn't find out what the myth is that informs that person's journey, what archetypes they represent. That's the point. It's not that the archetype has to be there at all times, or it has to be perfect, or it has to be everything about what's... And it's never going to be real, is it? It exists on a mythic level. Nothing about that is real. It's all symbology and the importance of how it connects to the human mind. The point is that, yeah, it isn't there in a tangible sense, but you don't impose it. You're going to discover it there from how your mind interacts with the story and your own understanding of the wealth of human archetypes and stories that already exist. There's a great example of this. It's one of the things that made me think of this video conceptually, which is in the movie Steve Jobs, which came out, I think it was a year ago, 2 years ago. It was a Danny Boyle film. It's a fantastic piece of film, and I won't spoil it, but at the end of the movie, there's an interaction between Steve Jobs, who's played by Michael Fassbender, a very great performance, and Steve Jobs' daughter. And what they do with how this interaction plays out ties together a lot of the different threads of what had been going on in the story of the film in a way which is incredibly meaningful, powerful, significant, true in a sense of how important and how vital the message it gave was. But I've actually read many, many books on Steve Jobs, which many interviews, read many biographies. I've obviously used a lot of software and stuff over the years. And I can tell you that this interaction never took place. In fact, nothing close to this interaction ever took place, actually. The key detail of what happens and kind of the reveal aspect never took place. In no sense was it true, if you mean true as in this is real, this is reality of what happened. And yet, this ending has more truth to it than the life of Steve Jobs itself and what really happened in his life. What they did, this great screenwriter, it was actually Aaron Sorkin who wrote the the guy who did The West Wing, who actually wrote the movie script. What he was able to do was look at Steve Jobs' life, read this biography about him, boil down the essence of him, and then when he wrote in and used artistic license, creative license, he was able to actually write a truer key moment, pivotal moment in Steve Jobs' life than Steve Jobs himself managed to accomplish in his own life. So this is what people should try and do in esports, because when we do this, we can elevate these gamers, these people playing the game, these matches that happen inside a server in a very abstract sense, to something special. And that's why people are so entranced by sports, by the story of some guy who becomes an entrepreneur and a businessman and a millionaire, and by even the stories of their own interpersonal relationships, which on a very basic level is not a whole lot. If you're an outsider and you don't know the person, you go, well, that's nothing. I mean, oh, the person said he love you. Who gives a fuck? But it's incredibly powerful to them, isn't it? So that's what we're looking for. Meaning that supersedes the mere facts of it. Because what's represented by the meaning is better in some senses than the base reality. We're putting some of the meaning onto the base reality to elevate it. Not to impose it and make it into something it never was, but to elevate it, or to at least for a moment see through the base reality what exists more in the storehouse of meaning. That's when stories are at their most powerful, when they are on the mythic level, when there's that resonance between the myth and how it plays out in reality. And when we can tap into something bigger and more significant about life. So some of these stories, they never happened, but they're true.